The store was alive with its usual symphony of noises. Shopping carts rattling over tile floors, the rhythmic beeping of barcode scanners, snippets of small talk between customers and cashiers, and the faint hum of a pop song playing overhead. But then, in the middle of that ordinary buzz, a different sound slipped through, quiet but sharp enough to slice right into Mark Walker's awareness. A soft, shaky sob, the kind you could miss if you weren't really listening. Mark, dressed in a plain gray hoodie, slightly faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days, looked like just another employee starting out on his first day. In truth, he was the CEO of FreshMart superstores, and he was undercover on a personal mission. Every few months, he went incognito to visit random store locations, partly to see how things really ran without the polish of a staged corporate visit, and partly to reconnect with the ground-level reality of the people who kept his company alive. Today's checklist was supposed to be simple. Evaluate the checkout process, observe customer service, and take mental notes on product placement. But as he scanned the busy aisles, the sound he'd just heard tugged at his focus. It didn't belong in this space of canned goods, price tags, and weekend shoppers. It was too raw, too human. His eyes drifted toward Register 3, and that's when he saw her, young, maybe early 20s, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the standard green FreshMart apron over a worn, pale blue hoodie. She stood stiffly behind the counter, scanning groceries with mechanical precision, and every so often, when she thought no one was looking, she brushed at her cheeks, quick and discreet, as if trying to erase any trace of weakness. Mark's step slowed. He pretended to browse a rack of candy bars and gum near her station, the kind of idle customer movement that drew no attention, but his ears tuned sharply to her register. A co-worker, a tall woman in her 30s with a clipped tone, leaned just close enough for her words to be heard only by the cashier, and unfortunately for her, by Mark as well. "You know people like you don't last long here," she muttered under her breath, her voice carrying an edge that was sharper than any box cutter in the stockroom. "Maybe this job isn't for someone like you." Mark felt something twist in his gut. The girl froze for half a second, her hand hovering over the next item to be scanned, her eyes flickering downward. She swallowed, almost imperceptibly, and without looking at her co-worker, resumed her task. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed items over the scanner, the beeps coming at uneven intervals now. She didn't respond, didn't defend herself, didn't ask what was meant by people like you. She just kept working, scanning, bagging, and forcing herself to remain invisible. Mark's jaw tightened. He'd been in countless board meetings about employee morale, anti-discrimination training, and workplace culture, but in this moment, none of those neatly typed policy documents mattered. This was the unfiltered truth. Right here, in a bustling checkout lane, a young woman was quietly being cut down in the middle of doing her job. He grabbed a candy bar, more for cover than anything else, and moved a little closer to the counter, his mind already shifting from undercover observer to man who needed answers. The hum of the store seemed to fade around him, the noise of the crowd blurring into the background, replaced by one thought. Something was wrong here, and he was going to find out exactly what. When the steady stream of customers finally slowed and the flurry of beeps, bagging, and credit card swipes faded into a lull, Mark saw his chance. He strolled toward Register 3, holding a chill bottle of water and a small pack of gum, an excuse to step into her space without making it obvious he was watching. The young woman behind the counter glanced up when he placed the items down, her hands pausing mid-motion. Up close, Mark noticed details he'd missed before, the faint puffiness around her eyes, the way her smile seemed polite yet practiced, like it had been stitched together out of habit rather than joy. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful, carrying the kind of concern that didn't demand an answer but offered room for one. She blinked, clearly startled that anyone had noticed her. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said after a beat, but her voice betrayed her, cracking softly on the last word. Her eyes darted away, focusing on the gum as if it were the most important thing in the world. Her name tag caught his eye, Tasha. The name felt gentle, fitting the warmth in her face, even if the warmth was dimmed by exhaustion. She couldn't have been more than 22, but there was a weight about her, the kind that didn't come from years, but from life pressing too hard, too soon. Mark opened his mouth to say something. Anything. to break through the invisible wall she had put up, but before he could, a sharp, cutting voice sliced into the moment. "Hey, Tasha, break's over. You still got a line," barked a tall man in a FreshMart apron, striding toward them with the authority of someone who liked the sound of his own orders. Mark glanced over at him. The shift supervisor, judging by the badge clipped to his chest. There was irritation in his tone, but also something else, something Mark didn't like. A subtle condescension, like he wasn't just talking to an employee, but talking down to one. And as Mark's eyes flicked toward the other registers, he noticed something. The supervisor's tone when addressing the other cashiers was different, lighter, more casual, without the barbed edge he'd used with Tasha. Tasha's reaction was immediate and telling. She nodded quickly, not meeting his gaze, her shoulders curling inward as if trying to make herself smaller. She didn't protest, didn't ask for the extra minute she clearly needed, just went right back to scanning items with silent efficiency, like she'd learned it was safer not to draw attention. Mark lingered for a moment, the water bottle growing warm in his hand, as a mixture of frustration and unease churned in his chest. He had been running FreshMart for over a decade, and he built the company on a vision he was proud of, a workplace where every employee, from the stockroom to corporate, felt like part of family. He'd given countless speeches about respect, inclusion, and support, but watching Tasha shrink under her supervisor's tone, seeing her hide behind forced smiles and quick compliance, he realized something deeply unsettling. Whatever his corporate ideals were on paper, here, in this store, something very different was taking root. It wasn't family. It was something colder, something quietly toxic, like a leak in a foundation that went unnoticed until the damage was too deep to ignore. Mark took a slow breath, stepped back from the counter, and walked away, but his mind was already spinning with questions and the sharp, unshakable conviction that what he had just witnessed was not going to be left alone. Later that afternoon, when the hum of the store quieted and the smell of reheated leftovers drifted faintly from the microwave, Mark made his way into the break room, carrying a cup of coffee he didn't particularly want. He had timed it so his arrival would seem casual, almost coincidental, but in truth, he had been watching for the right moment. Tasha sat alone at a small corner table, her lunch a simple sandwich wrapped in foil, a water bottle at her side, and her phone in her hand as she scrolled with slow, distracted movements. There was a stillness about her, the kind that comes when someone is holding a lot inside but doesn't have a safe place to let it out. Mark approached with an easy smile, masking the deliberate intent behind his steps. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, keeping his tone friendly but unintrusive. She looked up briefly, her expression neutral, then gave a slight shrug. "Sure." He slid into the chair across from her, setting his coffee down like he was just another tired employee looking for a break. He started with small talk, the kind of harmless, surface-level questions that felt safe. How long had she been working at FreshMart? What did she think of the job so far? At first, her answers were clipped but polite, her eyes flicking down to her sandwich between each sentence. Mark didn't mind. He knew trust was something you built, not something you demanded. So he let the pauses linger, filling the air with quiet understanding rather than pressing her to speak. Then, after a long silence, she took a small breath, looked down at the table, and said in a voice so soft it almost disappeared into the hum of the vending machine, "Honestly, it's been rough." Mark didn't interrupt. He leaned back slightly, giving her space, knowing from experience that people often needed to feel the silence before they could spill the truth. She stared at her hand for a moment, then continued, her voice trembling just enough to betray the effort it took to stay composed. "My mom's sick. I'm the only one working right now, so I've been picking up every shift I can. I try to do my best here, but..." She hesitated, swallowing hard, her gaze drifting to the floor. "Some people make me feel like I don't belong, like I'm not good enough." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and raw. "I've heard comments about my hair, about my accent." She gave a humorless little laugh. "I was born here, but they treat me like I'm an outsider." As she spoke, Mark felt something tighten in his chest, an ache that had nothing to do with him personally, but everything to do with what she was living through. He had read statistics, attended seminars, and sat through HR briefings about workplace discrimination, but those were abstract, distant. This was different. This was sitting across from a young woman who was doing everything right, showing up, working hard, caring for her sick mother, yet was being worn down by something as corrosive as prejudice, hidden in snide comments and double standards. She stopped suddenly, realizing how much she'd revealed, and quickly wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Sorry," she said, forcing a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't mean to dump all that on you. I'm fine." But Mark could see the truth beneath her words. How she kept saying, "I'm fine," like it was a shield, like if she repeated enough times she might convince herself it was true. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that she wasn't fine at all. Not here. Not in this environment that was supposed to be supportive. He took a sip of his coffee to give himself a moment, but inside, his decision had already been made. This wasn't going to be one of those situations that got filed away under management to review later. He wasn't going to let this slide. Not as an undercover employee, and certainly not as a man responsible for every store that bore the FreshMart name. The next morning, the atmosphere in the store felt different, though no one could quite place why at first. The usual early shift routine was in motion. Lights humming on overhead, coffee brewing in the break room, registers booting up. But there was a ripple of curiosity spreading through the staff. Mark arrived promptly at 8 a.m., no longer blending in as just another trainee. This time, he stepped through the automatic doors in a crisp charcoal suit, polished shoes, and a confidence that filled the space before he even spoke. The hoodie and jeans from the day before were gone, along with any trace of his undercover role. He didn't waste a moment. With a tone that left no room for question, he asked the store manager to gather every employee in the meeting room. Word traveled fast. Cashiers whispering to baggers, stock clerks exchanging curious looks as they made their way to the back. "Who's that?" someone murmured near the door. A few shrugged, but others recognized him instantly, their eyes widening as they straightened their posture. They'd seen his photo in company newsletters and training videos, the man who signed off on company-wide updates and holiday bonuses. But most had never seen him in person. Mark stepped to the front of the room, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, and introduced himself with steady authority. "I'm Mark Walker. I run this company." The reaction was immediate. Small gasps, the shuffle of chairs, and a sudden quiet that felt almost electric. In the corner, Tasha sat frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief as she realized who had been sitting across from her in the break room just the day before. Mark's voice was calm, but beneath it was a steel edge that commanded attention. "Yesterday," he began, "I came here undercover to see how things were going. What I found was unacceptable." His gaze swept the room, and then, deliberately, it landed on the shift supervisor, the same man whose condescending tone had made Tasha shrink into herself at the register. The supervisor shifted in his seat, avoiding Mark's eyes, his jaw tightening as if bracing for what was coming. Mark continued, his tone sharpening. "In this company, we treat every employee with dignity, no exceptions. I will not tolerate bullying, discrimination, or disrespect of any kind. If you think you can tear people down instead of lifting them up, you will not work here." The room was utterly still now, every word sinking deep. The supervisor tried to speak, a muttered excuse starting to form, but Mark cut him off without hesitation. "Save it. This is your final warning. One more complaint, and you're gone. We are done allowing behavior that poisons the environment for everyone else." No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Then Mark's tone softened as he turned toward Tasha, who sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, clearly unsure what to do with the sudden attention. "You," he said, his voice now carrying warmth and respect, "have shown strength, professionalism, and heart in the face of challenges no one should face at work. That is exactly the kind of person I want leading this team." A faint murmur of surprise moved through the staff. Tasha's mouth parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but couldn't quite find the words. Mark held her gaze for a moment longer, letting her see the sincerity in his expression before he looked back to the rest of the room. "This company was built on the belief that we're a family," he said. "And in a family, we protect and respect each other. That starts now, and it starts with all of you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was powerful. In that moment, everyone in the room understood that this wasn't just a speech. It was a turning point. 2 weeks later, the transformation in Tasha's life and in the store was unmistakable. She was no longer just a young cashier quietly holding back tears behind register 3. She now stood at the front of the store as the newly promoted customer service lead, wearing her name badge with pride and a confidence that seemed to radiate from her. The promotion came with a raise and, just as importantly, flexible hours so she could be there for her mother, whose health remained her top priority. Mark had made sure she wasn't stepping into the new role alone. He personally arranged for her to have a mentor, someone who could guide her, answer her questions, and make sure she felt supported every step of the way. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted too. The air that once carried quiet tension now felt warmer, lighter. Conversations between staff members had an ease they hadn't before. It wasn't lost on anyone that the toxic supervisor who once belittled Tasha had been replaced with someone who believed people mattered just as much as profit margins. On her first morning in the role, Tasha walked into the store with her head held high, her steps steady and sure. She wore a small but genuine smile, one that came not from forcing herself to seem fine, but from actually feeling it. As she crossed the floor, greeting customers and checking in with cashiers, she spotted Mark standing near the produce section, overseeing a shipment being arranged. Their eyes met across the space, and in that moment, she didn't need to speak for him to understand. She mouthed 2 simple words, "Thank you," but those words carried so much more: gratitude for believing in her, for seeing her worth when others tried to tear it down, for changing not just her job title but her entire experience of work. Mark's smile in return was quiet, but full of pride. He knew that FreshMart hadn't just gained a skilled and dedicated employee. They had gained something far more valuable, a living reminder of what the company stood for. Policies and handbooks could talk about respect all day, but true respect lived in moments like this, in the way people treated each other when no one was watching. Standing there, watching Tasha step confidently into her new chapter, Mark felt the clarity of purpose that had driven him to start this business in the first place. It had taken one undercover visit, one cruel comment overheard, and one brave young woman's resilience to remind him that leadership wasn't about charts and profit margins. It was about people. It was about protecting the dignity of those who gave their time and effort to make the company thrive. And as Tasha welcomed the customer with the same warmth she had shown even on her hardest days, Mark knew this wasn't just her victory. It was the company's too, a promise kept and a culture strengthened.